Hello and welcome to my YouTube. This YouTube is remembering the year 1943. My father was stationed in England with the 303rd Bombardment Group called the Hells Angels. This is the original Hells Angels, not that stupid motorcycle gang in California. They stole the name from my dad's bomber group. Franklin D. Roosevelt was president in 1943. America was at war, beginning with the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 6, 1941. So at the beginning of 1943, our country had been at war for 1 year, and we were not winning. Things were pretty gloomy at the beginning of 1943. The outcome of the war was totally up in the air. The Japanese Navy had 12 battleships in the Pacific, and because of the attack on Pearl Harbor, America had none. With the destruction of the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, the west coast of America was wide open to invasion by Japan. The American Army only had 174,000 troops at the start of World War II, while the Japanese Army had 6,900,000 troops. The war dominated everything in American life in 1943. The War Production Board ordered the end of all civilian automobile sales on January 1st, 1942. Car dealers had tens of thousands of new cars sitting on their lots that they weren't allowed to sell. Automobile factories stopped manufacturing cars and converted to producing tanks, aircrafts, weapons, and other military products with the United States government as the only customer. So there were no new cars made in 1943 or 1944 for that matter. As a result of gas rationing, all forms of automobile racing, including the Indianapolis 500, were banned. Sightseeing driving was also banned, and you could be arrested for violating this rule. And thousands of people were arrested. A national speed limit of 35 miles per hour was enforced to save gasoline and save rubber tires because the Japanese totally controlled the production of rubber in the world. So America had no rubber to build tires with. So we had to preserve our rubber tires. Special night courts were set up all around the country to prosecute those that violated the gas rationing and speed limit laws. Here you see a snapshot of just one night in a court. 22 cases this particular night. An A sticker on a car was the lowest priority of gasoline rationing and entitled the car owner to 3 gallons of gasoline per week. Now, cars only got about 10 miles per gallon back then, so you were limited to driving a total of about 15 miles per week, or about 2 miles a day. Think about it. How would your life change if you could only drive 2 miles a day? My grandparents lived on a farm, and it was 3 miles from their farm to the town. They couldn't even afford to drive into town. B sticker gas cards were issued to workers in critical military industry, entitling their holder to up to 8 gallons of gasoline per week to drive to work. C gas stickers were granted to persons deemed very essential to the war effort, such as doctors. X stickers on cars entitled the holders to unlimited supplies of gas. Clergy, police, firemen, and civil defense workers were in this category. A gallon of gas costs 21 cents. That's $3.81 in today's dollars. The average wage was $1,285. That's $23,323 in today's dollars. The average wage in America last year in 2024 was $66,622. So, my friends, how would you like to survive on 1/3 the amount of money you have now? How would you like to raise a family on 1/3 of the amount of money that the average American makes today? That's what my parents and my grandparents had to cope with back in 1943. The rate of inflation in 1943 was 6.13%. How's that compared to today? Today, March 30th, 2025, the rate of inflation is only 2.8% in America. So inflation was 3 times what it is today. There was no silk for women's silk hose. And by the way, all women wore hose in the 40s. And not pantyhose. Those didn't come along until the late 1980s. So women painted their legs and drew lines on the back of their legs to simulate the seam, because silk was too precious. And once again, America did not have access to the silk supplies of the world. And besides, we needed it for parachutes. How about tires? Civilians were allowed to keep 5 tires, 4 on their present passenger vehicle and 1 spare. The rest had to be surrendered. Good tires were so scarce that the government recommended recording their serial numbers in case they were stolen. And these are some of the posters. Defense needs rubbers. Save your tires. Drive slower in hot weather. Tires wear out 4 times as fast at 100 degrees as at 40. Make it do. Tire rationing in World War II. Save rubber. Check your tires now. So preserving our tires became a patriotic duty. On January 1st, the Soviet Union announced that 22 German divisions had been encircled at Stalingrad with 175,000 killed and 137,000 captured. This was a huge battle of World War II. The Germans had marched all the way across Russia to attack Stalingrad. On January 20th, the Guadalcanal campaign began. American forces of the 2nd Marine Division and the 25th Infantry Division began their assaults on Guadalcanal. This was an island in the Pacific. On January 12th, American forces make an unopposed landing on Amchitka. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. Amchitka, an island in the Aleutian Islands. The Japanese had actually invaded the Aleutian Islands, and they occupied some of them, and they took American citizens and some sailors prisoners. Now remember, Alaska wasn't officially a state, but it was an American territory. We bought it from the Russians. So that's a little trivia questions, what American land was actually occupied by the Japanese in World War II? And the answer is the Aleutian Islands, some of them. On January 14th was the Casablanca Conference. Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and General Charles de Gaulle of France attended that meeting. On January 27th, 50 bombers mount the first all-American air raid against Germany. Wilhelmshaven is the target, and my father, Robert Reese, flew in a B-17 in this raid. And how do I know that? Because I have his notebooks. He kept meticulous notes of all of the raids he was on during World War II. And I checked it out, and yes, he was in a plane in that raid, flying out of England. On February 1st, the U.S. War Production Board halts the manufacture of televisions and radios consumers used. TV stations were limited to only 4 hours per week to broadcast. Well, there were only 2 or 3 TV stations in the entire United States, and there were probably less than 1,000 television sets in the entire United States in 1943. So that was no big deal, but everybody listened to the radio. So to stop the manufacturing of radios, that was a big deal. People depended upon the radio to know what was going on in the world. On February 2nd, the Battle of Stalingrad comes to an end with the surrender of the German 6th Army. This was a huge victory for Russia. On February 7th, the federal government abruptly announced that wartime rationing of shoes made of leather would go into effect in 2 days, limiting consumers to buying 3 pairs per person per year. This was reduced to only 2 pairs per year a year later in 1944. So shoes were also rationed. We needed the leather. On February 19th, the Battle of Kasserine Pass, German General Erwin Rommel's, the Desert Fox, his Afrika Korps, and 6 other Axis forces launched an offensive against Allied defenders in Tunisia. It is the United States' first major battle defeat of the war. And this occurred in North Africa. On February 28th, Operation Gunnerside, 6 Norwegian commandos successfully attack the German heavy water plant at Vermork. Now, what's the deal here? Who cares about heavy water? The Germans were trying to develop the atomic bomb. And part of the research, you need heavy water. So they had this plant up in Norway that was producing heavy water, and the Allies found out about it. So these 6 commandos sneak in there and blow the place up, thus hindering the production of an atomic bomb by Germany. On March 5th, the Gloucester Meteor, the first Allied jet fighter, makes its first flight in England. Unfortunately, jets didn't have much impact on World War II. On March 13th, the Holocaust. Nazi German forces liquidate the Jews of Krakow ghetto in occupied Poland. By the end of the war, the Nazis had murdered 6 million Jews. On March 29, 1943, rationing of meats, fats, and cheese begins, limiting American consumers to store purchases of an average of about 2 pounds a week for beef or pork, and you had to use these coupons. Now, sugar and coffee and fish and lard had already been rationed, and that started a year before in 1942. So this added meats and fats and cheese to the rationing. It was very difficult for a housewife to plan a menu because you just ran out of things. You could run out of sugar. You could run out of cheese. You might not have any beef or pork. High school and college sports like footballs were especially affected in 1943 by the war. As boys enlisted, rosters shrank and schools were forced to either play six-man football or drop football. 200 colleges dropped football entirely, including schools such as Alabama, Michigan, Stanford, Harvard, Kentucky, Florida, Nebraska, Tennessee, Baylor, and Auburn. No football. The boys were enlisting, marching off to war. On April 21st, the first German Tiger I tank is captured in North Africa by British forces. This was the best tank probably in World War II. It could outrun and outgun anything the Allies had. So this thing could stand off several miles and hit the American and Allied tanks before our tanks even got within range of this thing. It was truly a tiger. On May 13th, the German Afrika Korps and the Italian troops in North Africa surrender to Allied forces. So in the middle of May of 1943, Allied forces now controlled Northern Africa. On May 15th, the 358th Bombardment Squadron and the 303rd Bombardment Group of B-17 Hells Angels is the very first Air Force bomber group to complete 25 missions. And this was a big deal to survive 25 missions. My father, Robert Reese, was a B-17 gunnery instructor in this 358th Bombardment Squadron. And how well I remember as a young boy, my dad had this leather jacket, and on the back of it was this logo. Here's this little angel with her halo sitting on a cloud, and she's got a bomb in her hand. Hell's Angels. And they were the first group to complete 25 missions. That was a big deal. On May 29th, Norman Rockwell's illustration of Rosie the Riveter first appears on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. And this was so popular that they developed posters of Rosie the Riveter, and this is the most famous one, We Can Do It. And this poster was based upon a real lady, and here she is. Her name wasn't Rosie, her name was May Creer, and she's 98 years old right now, and she lives in Pennsylvania. God bless you. On June 3rd, the Zoot Suit riots erupt between military personnel and Mexican-American youths in East Los Angeles. Now, I did some research. I'd never heard of these Zoot Suit riots. I did some research and I found this, and I want to share it with you. 2 years ago, on June 9th of 2023, and I read, in the very chamber where Los Angeles City Council members once debated banning Zoot Suits, city leaders formally apologized Friday for the role the city government played in fueling the brutal attacks on young Latino, Filipino, and Black Angelenos that played out across the city 8 decades ago in 1943. The apology comes exactly 80 years after the dark chapter in the city history where mobs of white servicemen, joined by police officers and civilians, roamed the city, instigating brutal attacks on minority youths. The indiscriminate violence was dubbed the Zoot Suit Riots, named for the baggy suits popular among the young people at the time. So that's the rest of that story. On June 20th through the 23rd, the Detroit race riots kill 34 people and wound hundreds more, and damages and destroys property worth millions. On July 19th, Rome is bombed by the Allies for the first time in the war. Remember, Italy was an ally of Germany in the beginning of 1943, at least. On July 24th, British and Canadian bombers bomb Hamburg by night, and American planes bomb the city by day. So they were bombing around the clock. By the end of the operation in November, 9,000 tons of explosives will have killed more than 42,000 people and destroyed 280,000 buildings. In other words, Hamburg was bombed to oblivion, bombed off the face of the earth. On July 25th, Benito Mussolini, the fascist prime minister of Italy since 1922, is arrested after the Grand Council of Fascism withdraws its support. Il Duce is replaced by General Pietro Badoglio. Sorry for my pronunciation. Anyway, they threw the guy out of office. On August 2nd, Lieutenant John F. Kennedy's PT boat, PT-109, is run down by a Japanese destroyer in the middle of the night. And young Lieutenant Kennedy was a hero. He saved his men and he swam back and forth to carry them from one island to another. A very heroic story. And 20 years later, this young John F. Kennedy becomes President of the United States. Unfortunately, he was assassinated in 1963. I was a young member of the Navy Blue Jacket Choir, and I sang at his funeral in Washington. On September 7th, the Gulf Hotel fire, a fire of the Gulf Hotel in Houston, Texas, kills 55 people. On October 13th, the new government of Italy sides with the Allies and declares war on Germany. On October the 16th, the Holocaust, raid of the ghetto of Rome. Over 1,000 Jews are rounded up in Rome by the Gestapo. Only 16 of them will survive their deportation to Auschwitz concentration camp. the public silence of Pope Pius XII on the raid becomes a matter of historical controversy. He said nothing publicly and was condemned for it by many, many people around the world. On November 3rd and 4th, Operation Harvest Festival. This was the largest single-day massacre of Jews in the entire war. 43,000 Jews are murdered by the SS in concentration camps in occupied Poland. 43,000 people in 2 days. On November 5th, 4 bombs are accidentally dropped on the neutral Vatican City. This is where the Pope lives. The aircraft responsible is never officially identified. So we bombed the Pope, or somebody did. November 16th, after flying from Britain, 160 American bombers strike a hydroelectric power facility and that heavy water factory in German-controlled Vemork, Norway. So remember the 6 sabotage guys blew it up? Well, the Germans rebuilt it and started their centrifuges, making heavy water again, trying to develop an atomic bomb. So these American bombers flew in there and blew that place to hell once and for all. So thanks to this raid, the Germans were never able to manufacture an atomic bomb. Because if they had, the war would have turned out entirely different. And I would probably be speaking German. Jawohl. November 28th, the Tehran Conference. President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin meet in Tehran to discuss war strategy. On the 30th, they establish an agreement concerning a planned June 1944 invasion of Europe, codenamed Operation Overlord. That was the famous D-Day invasion. But it was planned in 1943 at this meeting. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower becomes the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and he establishes the Supreme Headquarters in London. On December 31st, New Year's Eve, the Times Square Ball in Times Square, New York City, isn't dropped. Instead, there was a moment of silence at midnight, followed by the sound of bells playing from sound trucks at the base of the One Times Square building, right in here. So, no dropping of the ball. A moment of silence. Can you imagine what it must have been like for all these tens upon thousands of people standing there in total silence at midnight? So, who was born in 1943? I know all of you Americans will recognize all of these people. Janis Joplin, the great singer. The actress Blythe Danner. The fine actor Joe Pesci. The Beatles, George Harrison. The actress Lynn Redgrave. The actor Christopher Walken. The singer Barry Manilow. the newsman and television personality Geraldo Rivera. Now, for you younger people, I have to share one of his most famous or infamous moments on television. They found out where the gangster Al Capone's safe was, and so on live television, Geraldo Rivera was there. Well, they went in and excavated, and they opened up Al Capone's safe. Unfortunately, it was empty. There was nothing in it. And this all happened back in 1986. But, they made a huge deal on television advertising. We're going to open Al Capone's safe. And, they expected to find, I don't know, millions of dollars in gold and diamonds and money, but there wasn't anything in it. Empty. Mick Jagger was born in 1943. By the way, I was born in 1944. So I hadn't arrived on the scene yet. So Mick Jagger's 1 year older than me. The very fine actor Robert De Niro was born in 43. The very good singer Julio Iglesias was born in 1943. Chevy Chase, born in 43. Jim Morrison, the lead singer for the rock group The Doors. Keith Richards of the Rolling Stone. Looks like he's lived some hard years. And the folk singer John Denver, one of my favorites. So, what was invented in 1943? Airwick. Oh my gosh. This was terrible. I mean, this thing, what you did is it had this little wick, and so you pushed it down in the bottom, and it would soak up this fluid, and when you wanted to use it, you took the cap off and you pulled it up. My grandmother had a bottle of Airwick sitting in the bathroom, to try to mask bathroom odors. Let me tell you, folks, the smell of Airwick was far worse than anything in the bathroom. But everybody had it. I mean, you found it in all kinds of homes. Airwick. Thank God that's gone. LSD. LSD was invented by a Swiss chemist all the way back in 1943. Now, people didn't start taking it for drugs until the 1960s. That's when it came into its own. But this chemist, Albert Hofmann, a Swiss chemist, discovered it in 1943. Jacques Cousteau invented the aqualung, the scuba diving equipment. And for years, I used to watch him on TV. He was very, very popular. Jacques Cousteau, we all knew him. The Slinky. This was an accident. This coil was sitting on the desk, and it fell off the desk, and it started bouncing across the floor, and the guy saw it and thought, that's interesting. I wonder if I can use that. And the rest, as they say, is history. Silly putty. What we like to do is take it and we'd smear it on a newspaper, and it would lift the image off, and then you could take it and put it on a white piece of paper and transfer cartoons from a newspaper onto a piece of paper. That was one of the silly things we did with silly putty. So what were the 5 top grossing movies of 1943? And by that, grossing is money making. Which ones made the most money? So even though there was a war, Hollywood was still cranking out movies. Number 1, This is the Army. Biggest Moneymaker, starring a young actor by the name of Ronald Reagan. Yeah, that Ronald Reagan, who became governor of California and later president of the United States. But in 1943, he was still acting, and here he is. Next, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Gary Cooper and Ingrid Bergman. Big movie. Number 3, The Song of Bernadette, starring Jennifer Jones, Vincent Price, Lee J. Cobb, and I don't remember this other guy, William I can't even pronounce it. Oh, Charles Bickford, I remember him. But to me, Vincent Price was the biggest name. Next, Casablanca, Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman. Now, everybody knows this line. Play it again, Sam. You know what? It didn't happen. That line was never said. It never happened. What was said is, play it, Sam. You played it for her. Play it for me. But that thing got twisted around over time and people quoted, play it again, Sam. But that line was never, ever uttered in Casablanca. So now you know. A Guy Named Joe, starring Spencer Tracy and Irene Dunne. Also Van Johnson and Esther Williams. James Cagney won the Academy Award for the Best Actor in Yankee Doodle Dandy, the story of George M. Cohan. Greer Garson won the Academy Award for Best Actress in the movie Mrs. Miniver. And Mrs. Miniver won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Greer Garson and Walter Pidgeon, well-known actor. What were the 5 most popular radio shows in 1943? And by the way, we won't be doing television because nobody had a TV. And there were no TV stations broadcasting, so everybody was listening to the radio. Number 1, Amos and Andy. Amos and Andy was played by 2 old white guys, Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll. And this show went from 1928 to 1960. It was that popular. Fibber McGee and Molly was the second most popular radio show in America. Your Hit Parade, Lucky Strikes. This was the 3rd most popular radio station in America. Kate Smith Speaks. Kate Smith was a well-known singer, and she would come on the radio and give inspirational talks, and then she would sing. Kate is probably best known for singing, God Bless America. That's how I remember her. The Pepsodent Show, which was hosted by Bob Hope. This was a comedy musical variety show. So, who were the most popular singers or entertainers in 1943 in rank order? Who was number 1? Number 1, Bing Crosby. Number 2, a very young-looking Frank Sinatra. Number 3, Helen Forrest. She had a long, successful career singing for some of the biggest bands like Tommy Dorsey and Arnie Shaw. She was a singer with them, and she had some hit songs, but quite frankly, I don't remember her. Tommy Dorsey, well-known band director. And the Mills Brothers coming in at number 5, most popular musical acts in America. So what were the 5 most popular songs of 1943? Paper Doll by Frank Sinatra was number 1. I've Heard That Song Before by Harry James and the Orchestra. Number 3, There Are Such Things by Tommy Dorsey and his orchestra. Number 4, Taking a Chance on Love by Benny Goodman and his big band. And number 5, Brazil by Xavier Cugat. Cha-cha-cha. So thanks for watching, and thanks to the greatest generation who lived through those war years. This is me today. This is my wife, Sue. We are both 81 years old. So what I've just shared with you were the lives of my parents, Bob and Ian Reese, and my grandparents, Grace and Herman Reese, and my grandparents, Hugh and Mamie, who lived through those dark days of World War II and became known as the greatest generation. And I thank them from the bottom of my heart. Be well.